So we have been in the middle, we're not in the middle anymore. We're coming to the home stretch of this series that we're doing on the book of Hosea. And hoping and desiring that the message that Hosea has would be one that would communicate with us today. And I think it has, and it's a profound book. So today we're going to today and tomorrow, or next week, today and next week are the end of Hosea. We're coming to the end of it. So let me kind of just do a review. I love doing reviews. I want you to get the whole picture, the whole thread of what's going on in the book of Hosea. So Hosea is a minor prophet, meaning it's a short prophet. And he was to the northern kingdom of Israel after the civil war among those from Israel. The southern kingdom would be called Judah. The northern kingdom would be called Israel. And then in that, they were the northern tribes were the rebellious ones, if you will. They're the ones who said, we want to be separate. And over the years, they selected for themselves 19 different kings. And every one of those kings was an evil king. Not one was good. In the south, they had 20 different kings over the years. 8 of them were good, which does leave you 12 who were not very good, okay? So it's not like all their leadership was awesome. But we have Hosea who is speaking to the northern kingdom. And basically, like every other prophet is saying, hey, if you keep going down this road, the result is not going to be good. In other words, if there's a foolish road to walk down, right? If this is a foolish road, at the end of that is a particular thing. And if there's a good road over here and you go down that, there's a particular thing at the end of that. But at the end of a good road are good things, and the end of a foolish road are foolish things, and you don't find good things at the end of a foolish road. That's just a basic fundamental truth of life. And at the end of a good road, an honorable road, a righteous road, are really good and honorable things. But the northern kingdom of Israel kept walking down this road over here, and at the end of that is foolishness and chaos and hurt and pain and destruction, and that's where they just kept going down, no matter what anybody said, and frankly, no matter what Hosea said. They, at the end of the day, did not listen. And as we know, they were eventually taken over by the Assyrians, and in 722 they were overrun, and they were scattered to the winds, those 10 tribes. Wow, it's pretty painful. But the process of it, Hosea reveals the heart of God in all of this. And so we can see that the first part of the book of Hosea is all about this adultery that's illustrated. The adultery that Israel was living out was illustrated in the very relationship that Hosea had with his wife Gomer, who was going to be an adulterous woman, who was going to be unfaithful. Now, exactly where along the way, we don't know if it was before the kids or during the kids or after the kids, but eventually she decided that she was going to connect to other people. And she walked out on Hosea. And so he really wanted to say this, I think, is that before God wanted to work through Hosea, he needed Hosea to understand it and have it work inside of him, so that he particularly understood the pain that God had in his heart when the nation of Israel walked away because he had his own wife walk away. So he taught him in a very personal way. Second thing we learned out of that is that God's truth is designed to lead us to God's grace. We usually think that God's truth is designed to just nail us, judge us, and destroy us. But it's not. It's actually designed to bring us to God's grace, because that truth kind of hits us right in the face, right? But, and next is this, is that God is not only love, which we learn in this, but he's also light. He's holy. God is actually very holy. Now, so it brings us to ask this question on this is, where is God, what does God do when we've forgotten him? What happens? When we've kind of forgotten God, what's he do? Well, here's the incredible thing, is that God does 3 things. First of all, he woos us back. He desires to have us back. That seems kind of crazy to me, but that's what he wants. He wants to woo us back. Secondly, he does this. He gives all he has to purchase us back. Remember, Hosea gave everything he had, both financially and material-wise, to get his wife back. Wow, that's a bit radical. And then the third thing is that he calls us to holiness. He called Gomer to come back and live a holy life, to be a faithful life. And he calls us to a holiness, and he calls us to a holiness too. Not to be perfect, not to be some sort of religious pain in the neck, not to be Pharisees and legalists, but to come back to his holiness. That's what he calls us to. So, Then after that, we talked about Israel's indictment. That God, because they wouldn't respond, indicts them. And he really says this. Here's kind of the big idea, is that a society without God inevitably decays to its own demise. A society that rejects God is going to be left to its own devices. And it's to its own demise. And that even in the midst of the decay and demise, though, that God is aimed at restoring and transforming things. He never quits or gives up or kind of just sells us down the river. And then that the human heart is actually very broken, just like my machine is broken. So the human heart is actually terribly broken. You guys are really sorry. Okay. And then there's a punishment that comes. So that it doesn't get kind of excused. In fact, here's kind of the point. God's love does not simply excuse us from the consequences, the natural consequences of our sin. He doesn't excuse us. That's what we want so badly, but he doesn't. It happens still. He forgives, but there are consequences to our sin. And that there's true moral guilt. We actually have true moral guilt before him. And that the unique thing is this, and this is where his truth leads us to his grace, is that pain is a pathway to healing. Now that is probably something we want to reject in fullness in this culture. Pain is to be avoided at all costs. But actually, pain is what helps you grow. It is a pathway to healing. And that it gets our attention, right? So that's kind of where we left off last week. Now this week, we're going to talk about Israel's restoration. God is going to begin to do this restoration process. And in that, here's kind of the big ideas for today, okay? That restoration is based on the character of God, not ours. Restoration is based and starts in the faithfulness of God, the covenant that God makes with us, not us with him. That's where it starts, is with him and his character. And that it is revealed, and we'll see this, it's revealed in his past dealings with Israel, it's revealed in his present dealings with Israel, and it's at this time, and it's also based in his future dealings with Israel. And that's the same in our lives. That God's faithfulness is revealed in our past, it's revealed in our present, and it will be revealed in our future. So, before we go any farther, though, I think all of these principles can be illustrated in many of our lives. And so I would like to invite Tom and Dee Wilkinson to come up and join me, because I'd like you to hear part of their story that relates to a lot of this. So I'll give you guys the nice blue seats. The blue seats. Because we'll be here a few minutes, and so it's for this just simply to be comfortable. This is the day I should have worn slacks. It's okay. Yeah, please. Those are both for you. Tell us a little bit. Give us a context first for your lives so we kind of understand where this particular part of the story that we're going to talk about. But give us a context a little bit.
Okay, is this on? Is it on? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, last week when you spoke, God just really pricked both of our hearts that we just need to jump in here and share a little bit of who we are and our story. And, you know, as you talk about, we were not believers growing up. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. But there was much more God-infused truth in just the way we were raised, right and wrong. A lot of it was just based on biblical principles that our parents had from their parents and from their parents that tend to be just kind of washing away. So as I was growing up, I'll let Tom share his part, but as I was growing up, I knew right and wrong. But I was making some really crazy choices. And my choices took me down pathways that most of you would be shocked to find out about, probably. But we were just wild and crazy. We were choosing to do the things that gave us instant pleasure. I think I was looking for love in all the wrong places, as we say. Wanted to be popular, wanted to have fun, and there was way too much of the alcohol and drug and flower power scene in the 70s that just wrapped that all up and made it tied with a little bow. And that's who I was for probably about 10 years of my life.
Yeah, I also grew up in a home, church-going home, not an evangelical church-going home in the sense that we think of today. But as Dee said, as I became a young teenager and began to indulge in the party lifestyle, which continued on through my college years and a little bit beyond, I knew what I was doing was not right and wrong. My parents raised me better. I knew better, but I was just in it for my pleasure, for having fun, doing what I wanted to do. And I perhaps didn't have some of the difficult things that Dee did with her, particularly her father, but nonetheless, I was just acting out in just my own desires.
So we were at college when we met, and we were sort of the fraternity, wild and crazy. I danced on the tables, and he was running the fraternity. So it was a great combination. We fell in love. We fell in love, deeply in love with each other, in the middle of that. But we brought to our relationship many years of sexual craziness and sexual partners and all that ugly. But now we were in love, and I chased him for 4 years, and we finally got married. And you just think, okay, that's all behind us, and now it's going to be good. And our marriage started off being really great, but 6 months into it, we quickly realized that there had to be more to life. And God was pricking our hearts, bringing people into our lives, and 6 months after we were married, we both became believers. And, you're thankful, and you see there's something new and different, and it all starts to kind of make sense, and God's just doing such a great thing. And for 25 years now, we have been kind of walking that sanctified pathway, where you just learn something new and get excited about God and His Word, and all of those things have been awesome for us. And I thank Him every day for saving me from all of that junk in my life and moving me forward. But what happened last week when Kevin starts talking about consequences, I just thought we better share something.
So yeah, after we actually came to Christ here in St. Louis, and then after that we moved to Minneapolis for about 15 years. And during that period of time, we had and raised 6 children, and we were the kind of people that every time the doors of the church were open, we were there, and we grew in our faith. And then a few years after that, we moved back here to St. Louis, and everything was going along fine. We'd had very few trials in our life, and in fact, I'd started having sore throat, a lot of earaches, that sort of thing, and the day before we were actually going, I was leading a team to Germany on a mission trip. And the day before I went, the doctor said, something's just not right here, and you've been having too much of this problem. So the ENT scoped my throat and found a tumor in my throat. And, of course, he wanted to get me in right away for biopsy, and I said, well, I'll have to wait about 10 days because I'm leaving tomorrow morning for Germany. So, but by the time we got back, he did say you probably have cancer, but we'll have to verify it with a biopsy. So, but we kind of knew that. We didn't really tell anybody for the time we were in Germany. And when I got back, I had the biopsy and so on, and they were going to remove my tonsils. And during that period too, it had spread to my neck, and I knew something was up because I had this big lump forming in my neck, and so I did go to another surgeon, and he did the biopsy and all that. And yes, I had stage 4 throat and neck cancer, so when you hear that cancer word, it's it gets your attention. And I'll let Dee tell you a little bit from that point.
Yeah, so this was the hardest thing in our lives so far, to find out that you've got stage 4 cancer, and there's some of you sitting in this room that know what that feels like and have friends and family that have been through this. And I was not ready for my husband to be taken. I was not ready for any of this. We were pretty much in shock, and everybody asked us, well, so did he smoke a whole lot? And Tom was never a smoker, and so we couldn't figure out what was going on. I mean, super healthy guy, really. I mean, really off the charts healthy for his age and stage in life. And so we come to find out, and, you know, this is, we went through a process, obviously a long process of chemo, radiation, surgery, recovery, and all of those things. And God was incredible and faithful. And I don't think we would ever change that for where we are today. As hard as that is to say, it was such an incredible presence of God through that we would not want to take it away. We loved it. That intimacy was amazing. But we came to find out through all the biopsies and all the information that we got that Tom had HPV-related throat cancer. So some of you are sitting in this room wondering what that is, but it's human papillomavirus, and it is a sexually transmitted disease that we probably got when we were in our, 15 to 20-year-old range of crazy sexual partners. And for some reason, crazy as it is, in men, it lays dormant for a long time. And so when we found that out, obviously, there's nothing you can do about it. It's a fact, right? We've had many opportunities to share with youth groups and our kids in Germany that are sexually active and think that the consequences of that will never haunt them. When I was sexually active, my biggest fear was getting pregnant, but I love babies. I didn't think that was a big deal. But, we go 25 to 30 years later and have HPV-related throat cancer that could have killed my husband. It's a mixture here of just understanding that the consequences of choices and behavior, you're still taking a risk. And if you do it God's way, you got better odds. If you don't, you're really playing with fire. And so many young people today are, and this is just my little soapbox, but so many young people are doing vaccinations to prevent the effects of some of these things. Like Gardasil, for one, is one of those things that we can vaccinate our kids so they won't get HPV. Well, I would say to you, okay, medicine, science, they're wonderful. We can take advantage of some of those things. But when we were sexually active, we didn't know HPV even existed. And so 25 years from now, we have no idea. We have no idea what will be growing or going on. And so, the consequences are going to still come if you play with fire and you don't do it God's way. And I just feel like I read Hosea. I've read Hosea so many times. I can relate so much to, what's her name? Is it Gomer? Whatever. I can relate to her so much on so many different levels, and I think so many of us can. That's why God gave us that book. But I know the consequences of sin are going to be something that you will suffer, and I also know that the consequences of sin are something God can use. And part of the reason I love 2 Corinthians 1 is that we were comforted by God, and it's given us many opportunities to comfort others. But you're still going to have consequences.
Yeah, and do you learn through pain? Does pain get your attention? And I would say yes, for sure. I mean, I know a lot of you have experienced or know people that experience cancer where it goes on for years. Mine was, I say it's more like a marathon versus a 400-meter dash. Mine was the 400-meter dash. It was very hard and very fast. I mean, it was, 6 or 8 months and it was over, but it was very difficult. And I still have side effects today that remind me every day, of God just didn't heal me and let me off the hook. I have some side effects that helps me remember that every day. One thing I would say, besides the blessings of just being healed, and since that time we have I've been able to walk a couple of daughters down the aisle. We have 7 more grandchildren than I had at that point. And, so there have been blessings. And, one thing that it enhanced a lot in my life was my prayer life. And that, before when people were ill or particularly physical illness, I would tell people I would pray. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. But now I do. It definitely has enhanced my prayer life, my devotion to that, my devotion to keeping up with people that are ill, and having experienced some of that myself, and knowing the prayers and the concern that was shown for me. But yeah, I would like to emphasize, particularly for young people, that whatever those consequences are, whatever those things you do, there's no guarantee that you will have consequences. You may not know what they are. It may just mean that, you don't realize the potential that God has for you. Or it could be something like cancer. But there are consequences to our behavior, just like there was for Israel.
Mm-hmm. And the reality of God's restorative work, though he doesn't always take away the consequences. And it's an interesting process of life, but God's grace is very real. Thank you for telling us your story. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, God. So it seems to me then that the question has got to be, what is this God actually like? And that's what all this book has been about. What's this God really like? That can meet us in the midst of our brokenness, meet us in the midst of all this stuff that happens, the reality and the consequences. What's he like? And so this last part we'll spend 2 weeks on the last several chapters of Hosea. I've selected just the first portion of chapter 11. And I think it's this incredible revelation and expression of who God is in the midst of all of this, okay? So let's look at this. Chapter 11, verses 1 through 9. And you're going to see in here there's a bunch of I statements. God is speaking. I. That's why I say it's based on his character, on his faithfulness, on his covenant, on who he is. And then it's going to be our response or lack of response. Israel never responds. The real question at the end of the day is, how are we going to respond? So let's look at it, though. Look at this in verse 1, chapter 11. It says, when Israel was a child. So this whole section is going to be very parental in a sense. It's going to kind of describe God in a way that's kind of going to be a little bit different than this husband-wife thing. So the same dynamics, the same relational dynamics. But look at this. When Israel was a child, and we're going to now circle this, I loved him. This is what God is saying. When Israel was a child, in their growing up years, kind of when it was all developing, he says, I want you to know, man, I loved him. I loved Israel. Wow, that's incredible. And then he says, and out of Egypt, I called my son. So we know that historically we have the Jews who have gone down to Egypt. They went down there for protection, ended up being in bondage. They ended up being millions of them, and God calls them out of there. He uses Moses to bring them out, and he brings them out, and he calls them. He didn't forget about them down there. Have you ever felt like God has forgotten you? We have all felt that, right? That you're hanging out in Egypt, and God has forgotten all about you. And here this suggests he's not forgotten you. It was 400 years they were there, but he didn't forget. And he used Moses and he called him out of Egypt. This is incredible. I loved him and I called my son. Look at this in verse 2. Now this kind of suggests that's God's part. Look at this. Here's Israel's part. The more they were called, the more they went away. It's somehow, the more he called them, the more deaf they became, the more insistent they became on doing what was wrong. Wow, it's incredible. The more that they called, the more they went away and kept sacrificing to the Baals, to these other gods, who led them to do all sorts of incredibly immoral things. And he says he kept sacrificing to the Baals and burnt offerings to idols. They kept moving farther away from me. Verse 3, yet. let's circle it. We always tell you to circle your butts, but here we're going to circle our yets. And so you always circle these things because somehow he says, yet, in spite of, even in light of all the things that they keep moving away from me, yet. Wow, that's pretty amazing thought. Wouldn't you think that if you kept moving away from God, that he kept treating you, well, that he kept saying, I love you and I've called you, and we keep moving away, that eventually he'd say, stick it. Had it. Done. Let's wash it clean, out the door. And he doesn't say that. Look at this. He says, and yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. Ephraim is one of the tribes of the northern tribes of Israel, sometimes used synonymously with Israel. He says, it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. Sounds like a parent. Remember those days as a parent? Maybe some of you aren't parents yet. Someday you're going to have these kids. And that process of teaching them to walk, it is a wonderful time, right? It is incredible. I'm the one who taught Ephraim to walk, God says. Look at this. I took them up by their arms. You remember as a parent, you take them up by they reach for you, and you reach down. It looks a lot like this picture right here. Do you remember those days? Just the beauty of picking them up by their arms and holding them. It's a wonderful experience. It is a beautiful time. You know what and then about 1 year old, they learn to walk. At 2 years old, they learn to talk. At 3 years old, they learn to talk back. But at that 1 year old thing, when you get to teach them to walk, so this is really picturesque, right? I mean, you got to really picture it. To really picture it, we need to picture it in this video. This is what it looks like. Remember those days? It's wonderful.
Can you walk?
It's beautiful.
Okay, can you see? Standing and clapping. Whoa.
Okay, so I don't even know how to tell you, but that is what God does for us. He teaches us to walk. And there's some siblings along the way who try to help you crash. But God helps us learn how to walk. It's really, the warmth of this passage is almost stunning. I am the one who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up by their arms. And then look at this last line. It says, but they did not know that I healed them. They didn't realize it. They didn't stop to figure it out. They didn't really care. They just kept going about their way. They didn't know that I'm the one who healed them. Remember when that Gomer didn't know that he was the one who was supplying for her needs? He was the one who kept sending food and money to support her. She just kept going about her way. But her husband, Hosea, kept giving to support her, to care for her, to make sure that she didn't crash. But she just kept going about her way. Wow. Look in verse 4. He continues. He says, let's circle it. I led them with cords of kindness and with bands of love. That's what your God is like. That's what he does. Amazing. And I became to them as one who eases the yoke on their jaws. So when you used to put cattle in a yoke, it was very difficult for them to eat. with that. And he would loosen that up so that they could eat. And look at this. And he bent down. Not only did he allow them to eat, but he bent down and fed them himself. That's the kind of heart that God has. It's almost hard for us to even comprehend, to embrace, to even get our arms around. But that is what God is like. Wow. Now, verses 5, 6, and 7 go back to talk about Israel, okay? So let's put this in a box. Let's put it in a little bit of a dark box. It's only gray, but this is what they did. That's what God was like. This is what Israel's like. Look at this. It says, they shall not return to the land of Egypt, but Assyria shall be their king. Assyria is going to come. If they don't respond, Assyria is coming, because they have refused to return to me. The sword shall rage against their cities, consume the bars of their gates, and devour them because of their own counsels. They were headed for destruction. They kept going down this road to chaos and destruction. They insisted on it. Wow. Verse 7, my people are bent on turning away from me. And though they call out to the Most High, he shall not raise them up at all. Yeah, when we get in trouble, we're like, hey God, hey God. But we're really not in our heart. It's just wanting to escape the consequences of our chaos. But then look at this in verse 8. There's almost an unspoken but. We could circle it, but we're going to box it. But even in the midst of that, look at this. How can I give up Ephraim? How can I give him up? Yeah, they've rebelled, they've walked away, they have totally demeaned me. But how do I walk away from them? You know, with our kids, sometimes, I don't know if you've ever had a kid that's on a prodigal road and chosen to say, I'm out of here. I reject you, and I reject everything about you, and I reject everything you stand for. I'm choosing my own way. I'll do whatever I want. And basically telling you where to put it. And it hurts and it's painful, but there is something about being a parent that they're still your kid. Might break your heart, might hurt you deeply, but they're still your kid. And he says, how can I give up Ephraim? He goes on, he says, how can I hand over Israel? How can I make you like Admah? And how can I treat you like Zeboim? Admah and Zeboim were two cities that were destroyed along with Sodom and Gomorrah. And he's saying, how can I do this to them? How can I allow that to happen? And look at this. This is an incredible thought here. My heart, God says, recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender. For those of you who have known that we're kids on a prodigal road, you know that happens. Your heart breaks for them. Yes, you're hurt, sometimes angry, but your heart breaks for that child because you know where it's taking them. And it breaks for them. And you grow warm and tender deep down inside of you. In your desire for them, your love for them, your heart for them. And verse 9 says, I will not execute my burning anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim. Here's this incredible thought, for I am God and not man. It is an incredible description that he's so different than us. Because we eventually want to just get angry and reject and hurt and blame and shame and put guilt and just, kind of put them out. It's that whole saying that, I brought you into the world and I can take you out of it too. That's that way we want to be it. But God says, and I'm different than you. I'm not a man, I'm God himself. And look at this, the description. Look at this. I am the Holy One in your midst. I am the holy God in your midst. And I will not come in wrath. I come to redeem. The same redemption that God did in Tom and Dee's life is what he wants to do in the lives of these people. And I would suggest it's probably what he wants to do in our lives. So let me just go back to the beginning here again. Restoration is based on the character of God. Do you see all the I statements in there? I'm the one who loved them. I'm the one who called them. I'm the one who taught them to walk. I am the one who lifted them by the arms. I am the one who is not going to exercise wrath. I am the one who keeps coming towards us. Wow. Restoration is based on the character of God and not yours. He wants our response, but it's not based there. It's based in his nature and his character, his love for you. Now, if that's how much he loves you, why would you walk away? Why would you say no thank you? Why would you keep going to the Baals? Why would you keep trying to sacrifice to idols? Why would you do that when it's just to the destruction of our own lives? Wow. So, therefore, what now? What do we do as a result? Here's my thought. Is that if restoration is based on the character of God, it's revealed in our past and it is revealed even in our present. And so let me just ask this on this next slide. Even though Israel didn't respond to God's compassionate warmth and tenderness, the real question is, how will you respond to his tenderness and his warmth and his compassion? The real question is, how will we respond? The real question is, how will I respond? And will I just keep going down that road, down this foolish road? Do I just keep going down this thing? Because the end of this road is not pretty. Or am I willing to say, God, if you love me that much, I want to go down this road. I want to walk this one with you. I want to experience you in the depth of who you are. I want to be your man. I want to be your woman. I want to be your young person. Because down there is a destination that has beauty to it. It's not perfection. It's not easy. But it's restorative. Which one do you choose? I think he's saying. And he keeps offering everything that we need for him in our lives. So the real question is, which one are you headed on? And he keeps calling us to his holiness, to over here. Not to a religiousness. That is just worthless. It's not some sort of pharisaical legalism, religiosity. That is worthless. It's as bad as that road over there. This one is called walking with God and loving him and loving people. And letting him love us deeply to change my heart. And so that I would both respond to him and love people like he does. Now, I don't know about you, but I want to walk on this road. But I find myself an incredible failure. An incredible failure at it. But it's not based on me. It is based on him, right? His character. So I keep coming back to him and saying, God, I failed again. He goes, I know. But let's get up and go again. Let's just keep going. Because I can do work in your life. What road do you choose? Israel chose a crazy, stupid road. Now, here's the interesting thing. Next week, we're going to talk about the fact of his redemptive work in the future, even for Israel and even for us. But today, I think the question is, what road do you choose? When there's a God like that, why would you walk away? Well, it's because the human heart is bent towards it. That's why. And if we say, God, I need you to change my heart, I want to walk on this road with you. That's my prayer for you this morning. That's my desire for you. That's my desire for me. That's my desire for us, is to respond. Like Gomer eventually responded to Hosea, and she came back, and she was refreshed. You guys, take a minute, just right here, to pray. Spend a little time answering that question in your own heart. Just wrestle with God for a moment, for a minute, and choose this day which road you'll be on. But as those before us have said, many, as for me, I choose this.